Have you ever wondered what your dreams mean? Join us in Dream School at thisjungianlife.com and find out. Jung wrote, "Dreams are a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul."
Dream School is a unique, self-paced online program you can start at any time that unlocks access to your inner world. Our 12-month program provides the support, knowledge, and guidance you need to reach within, decipher your personal dream code, and harness it to optimize your life. By enrolling, you'll join an affirming community of fellow travelers, each pursuing a unique quest.
And it's fun. Join us on an adventure to wholeness and healing through understanding your dreams. Go to thisjungianlife.com and click on Dream School. You'll be taken to our secure checkout. Once you join, you'll get immediate access to our first 3 modules. You can get started right away. We look forward to seeing you there.
Welcome to This Jungian Life. 3 good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod. Today, we are going to talk about truth in all, or we hope as close to all of its many, many facets as we possibly can of what takes place in relationships and in our collective as truth. What is adaptive? What are the facts here? What are some of the physiological components around truth? And of course, perhaps most important, of how do we tell ourselves the truth? How do we know when we're telling ourselves the truth? And what does that mean between me and me, or you and you?
So I can imagine for the listeners and in myself that the truth feels like that alone is a great thing to attain. Philosophers, theologians, seeking to define what is the truth or what is the ultimate truth. But I think that when we are telling the truth, there is a kind of congruence in the personality that's reflected by a kind of relaxation in the nervous system. And that when we're violating that congruence, there are small signals that we're not aligned with what's true inside of ourselves, and that Jung noticed that when he was doing the word association test. And eventually, not only was he looking at how long it took for somebody to respond to a stimulus, but eventually I believe he worked with galvanic skin testers, which are even used now. So people would hold a bit of a device and it would measure how easily an electric current was passing from one hand to the other. And when they could not relate cleanly to a stimulus word, the electrical resistance in the body jumped up. And this is the birth of the modern lie detectors, that when we are speaking something that's not truly aligned with our body, that this literally an electrical resistance builds up inside us.
I really love that because it links this idea of the complex, which we know was an idea that grew out of the word association test, to this notion that somehow when we're in a complex, there's a way that we may be lying to ourselves. And of course, the other way to think about that would be as a defense, the classic defense being denial. But denial is a form of not being truthful with ourselves.
I think it's really informative and somehow incredibly reassuring for us to think about how our bodies, our basic biology, is wired for when something doesn't feel right, something's off, that we have physiological arousal that is associated with a complex, or something's not right here.
Yeah.
Something is not, I am not altogether in alignment with what's going on in myself or what is going on in a particular situation that I'm in. And a further corroboration of that is they did an experiment of asking people to deliberately lie. They would show them a card and then tell them while they were in the MRI machine to say that it was a different card from the one they were shown. And different areas in the brain lit up, even when it was a construct in such a very just kind of benign way. So we have our bodies.
Mm-hmm. And Jung said the highest truth grows from the deepest roots of the body and not from the spirit.
Oh.
Wow.
I'm thinking of a clinical vignette, which I know I've mentioned some years in the past, but I was doing family work and there was a teenage girl that came in high school and she had developed a really severe insomnia. And we're talking and talking and talking. And then what I begin to notice is how passive the girl is and how desperate she is to accommodate her parents and particularly her mom. Finally, as we're digging into it, she's able to acknowledge and express that she's enraged at her mom for a number of things. And she really goes into this tremendous explosion of anger in the session. And then that night, her insomnia disappeared and it didn't come back.
Mm.
So in this lens of truth, one of the ways that we can resist the truth is often by being placating.
Mm-hmm.
Like when somebody asks us, are you okay? And we're like, oh, I'm fine. It's fine. Yeah, whatever you need. And that over time, because we're not expressing what's true for us, again, the body can go to war with us.
Yeah.
And in this case, with insomnia.
Mm-hmm.
You're also lifting up here, Joseph, what an important part relationships play of who can we tell the truth to, what has been forbidden, and oftentimes it's any kind of conflict in a family or friendship or a workplace. And sometimes we don't even know what our own truth is. If we've really been brought up to believe that, let's say, anger, thinking of your client, that anger is a no-no. It's absolutely, we never feel anger in our family. Well, the truth was for your client that she was angry, to quote an old trope, and the truth seemed to set her free.
Absolutely. And it seemed to set the family free as well. That everybody needed to just acknowledge this truth of this terrible tension that was moving around, which is also not uncommon when you've got a teenage child. Mm-hmm. There's often a lot of tension moving through the household, but everybody just pretending that it's not there and not just speaking it creates this weird distortion.
It seems to me, Joseph, that one of the things that story really lifts up is how helping the analysand find and deliver his or her truth into the world is such an important part of analysis. And because a lot of times we don't even know our own truth. And we may have an inkling of it. We may know that somehow we're not living in alignment with it. But it can be through this kind of dyadic process with an analyst that we're able to articulate it and claim it.
To acknowledge it in ourselves and also just to find the words for it.
Yeah.
So words, as it turns out, this is new news here, are very, very important.
Yes.
Of the emotional truth and finding the words to say it. And guess who? Carl Jung has something important to say about words. He says, what are words? Be tentative with words. Value them well. Take safe words, words without catches. Do not spin them with one another so that no webs arise. For you are the first who is ensnared in them. for words have meanings. With words, you pull up the underworld. Word, the paltriest and the mightiest. In words, the emptiness and the fullness flow together. Hence, the word is an image of God. The word is the greatest and the smallest that man created, just as what is created through man is the greatest and smallest. That, for me, is just gobsmacking.
Yeah.
We have the gift of language, which over millennia has become more and more and more refined and nuanced. And it's the engine of consciousness.
It allows us to think about things. It allows us to put distance between ourselves and our emotional experiences because we can hold it out there and kind of walk around it. It's interesting, though, because language is just a way of representing reality. And therefore, words, the question of words brings up this very large philosophical issue about the relationship between reality and that which represents reality, and how true is the representation. And some people will say, well, it's that there is no such thing as truth. It's just the representation, and so that's what we need to go with. But I think that is this kind of the movement in that direction is a move away from embodiment and nature. I want to bring up this quote from Ian McGilchrist from The Master and His Emissary. He says, "Things are not whatever we care to make them. There is a something that exists apart from our own minds, and our attempt to apprehend whatever it is needs to be true to, faithful true, that whatever it is that exists, and at the same time true to ourselves in making that apprehension. No single truth does not mean no truth." Because there's a problem with truth, right? We're asked, it's important that we can agree on what truth is. And that brings up these questions about reality and our representation of reality and how closely those things are aligned.
As you were saying, Lisa, that at a certain level of conscious development, we can think that truth is contained in language,
Yes.
rather than truth being an attempt to express a larger reality. And this is the conundrum that we are in, not just nationally, but internationally, that all kinds of outlandish words and language can show up and infiltrate a community and create a false sense of reality just because it's in language.
And it's this language that's kind of divorced from this rootedness in the body that was mentioned before in this other quote from Jung. And that we started with, Joseph, with your talking about how when we're not congruent with the truth in our bodies register that.
Exactly. So that when crazy talk is being introduced to a community, it actually creates a kind of anxiety in the people who hear it. But often the anxiety doesn't have a target. So it can be misappropriated or misaligned with the content of the crazy language. And what needs to happen is people need to reclaim the intelligence of their body. So when they hear something that's outrageous, the anxiety in your body is a signal that it isn't true.
Yes. I think that what you're saying is so important, and to pay attention to how we feel when we hear certain things. Do we feel anxious? Do we feel scared? Are we angry? Are we, kind of defensive? Do we feel vulnerable? Those are indicators to wait a minute, stop, process it some more. Because I think truth does not arouse all of those terribly convoluted, ongoing feelings of fear and rage and righteousness and those kinds of things are real indicators. Stop. What's happening here?
I worked with a woman who was asked to capitulate on a basic truth because of an interpersonal situation. So she was asked to disavow something that she knew was sort of basic truth and to kind of go along with this rather fantastical story in the interest of maintaining a relationship. And she did so without being consciously aware of that that's what she was doing. She was really just trying to kind of go along and do the right thing. But at some deep level, she knew it wasn't true. She began to have severe vertigo, and to the point where she was really, somewhat incapacitated for a little while. She could sort of hobble around her house, but she couldn't walk the family dog. And she had all this, kind of workup done medically. And then it kind of came to light that what she had been espousing just simply wasn't true. And when she admitted that to herself, the symptoms cleared up.
That's a great example of being in integrity with the body and language and the thinking function. I'm also thinking similarly about another situation where a marriage was in trouble and the male partner began to feel tremendously anxious and suspicious and developed erectile dysfunction, was unable to respond to sexuality in the way that he was accustomed to in the marriage was. And this created, a lot of conversations and a lot of tumult. And then it was finally, as the truth emerged, that the wife actually had and concluded an affair. As she was holding that secretly, there developed a kind of strange, anxious field between the two of them, which was disruptive to both of their bodies.
Yeah.
Interestingly, when the truth was finally languaged, it didn't turn into a kind of conflagration, that both of them actually relaxed. I mean, it was sad and there was a lot of woundedness, but the frenetic spinning and distress just finally landed on the ground. And then she actually felt a lot better because she was feeling crazy by this dark truth. And he also felt better because his anxieties were finally related to something that was true, rather than him searching around for something frantically that he could not find language for.
Right, which is why it can be really cruel to withhold truth.
Yeah.
Because often we know it already, or our bodies know it. And when someone says, no, that didn't happen, it can be really, really confusing. I think, we can move to talk about truth in the consulting room. And I try my very hardest to be very truthful with people with whom I'm working about large things and small, because it is so powerfully destructive to not be truthful.
I agree, Lisa. I think it's incredibly important to have that kind of integrity within ourselves as the analyst of what is truly true. Where are the words that I need to say? The response might be not answering the question as it was posed, but what is my truth about the question that you've asked? It strikes me as this way. But to take the time to find the truth of what is really real and how am I, as the analyst, in alignment with myself, my intuition, my bodily sensations, my feeling, and the thinking that will finally emerge in words. And I think to lift up the point you were making, Joseph, or at least about the client with vertigo, and Joseph, your client, there is safety in truth. It may be sad, it may be difficult to process, but there you feel safe. There's a relief of, finally, I'm grounded. So I think those two are aligned, the safety and reality around truth.
An additional thing that comes up for me is often when the word truth is leveled on a cultural conversation, there's a fantasy of an ultimate truth. And then we get into kind of religious realms.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that in the therapeutic process, in an analysis, I experience more of a progressive revelation, which is a way of holding truth as an evolving process.
Sure. Yes.
And not because anyone is necessarily being consciously deceptive, but we're in the consulting room and we become aware of a part that's true or clarified. And so we name that part, and that gets into the jigsaw puzzle. And then months or years may go by, and each progressive revelation puts another part in. And just like a really complicated jigsaw puzzle, particularly if you didn't have a picture of it on the box, you're not quite sure what the full image is going to be until all the pieces are put in. And then we can stand back and at the very least have an image of what's going on, but to find more comprehensive language.
Well, and Joseph, I really like that because I think it describes the analytic process, but it also describes that process of coming to know ourselves and what is the truth about ourselves. And I think that the truth is that that is always evolving. We may think we know kind of who we are, but we we might get to know who we are for right now. We might any truth we discover is always only a partial truth, I think, is what I'm trying to say. A few years ago, I read this novel that I really liked called The Nix by Nathan Hill. And it's the story of a woman, and it kind of follows her throughout her life, and she's trying to figure out who she really is. And toward the end of the book, there's kind of a great little take on this that I want to read. So the woman's name in the book, her name is Faye, and this is now from the novel. In the story of the blind man and the elephant, what's usually is ignored is the fact that each man's description was correct. What Faye won't understand and may never understand is that there is not one true self hidden by many false ones. Rather, there is one true self hidden by many true ones. Yes, she is the meek and shy and industrious student. Yes, she is the panicky and frightened child. Yes, she is the bold and impulsive seductress. Yes, she is the wife, the mother, and many other things as well. Her belief that only one of these is true obscures the larger truth, which was ultimately the problem with the blind man and the elephant. It wasn't that they were blind, it's that they stopped too quickly and so never knew there was a larger truth to grasp. Seeing ourselves clearly is the project of a lifetime.
That's really perfect and profound, and points to multiple realities, the multiple realities of ourselves, not to mention other people and the world, and how important it is to keep on being interested, to keep on being curious, to keep on being open to more.
And more versions of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we can also just toss around for a little bit is the relationship between aesthetics and truth. And of course, there's that Keats line, beauty is truth, truth is beauty, that is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. So I'm wondering how the aesthetics of truth plays perhaps into our personal lives or professional lives.
Well, I'm just thinking, going back to where we started about how you can kind of feel truth in your body and it feels right. To me, that's related to an experience of beauty. There's a way that when you look at something beautiful or you have an aesthetic experience, it also kind of feels right in your body.
We pick up a wholeness in it and we resonate to that. You know, whether it's something in nature that is just absolutely beautiful or in another person, we are resonant to beauty because it's whole and it's vulnerable and it's out there, undefended. And I think that's the power of aesthetic.
It's a feeling, and I think that it's also an energy. And it reminds me of Brian Feldman's work with infant mother dyads. And one of the ways that he was trying to improve the connection between the infant and the mother is using the aesthetics that were aroused by observing the dyad. So, for instance, a mother who perhaps had a trauma history or was in really bad circumstances might have a child in their arm, is looking away, is not responding to the child's crying, maybe is holding the child very tensely. And the dynamic that emerges, even imagistically, is highly disturbing. And that, as Feldman would then coach the mother to do something as simple as to be able to just gaze in the eyes of the child, to be able to, over time, enjoy the child, and then to observe the feeling that it evokes in observing the behavior, and how a quality of beauty then seemed to accompany the interaction. Now, I'm not an apologist for Feldman's work, but what I often have thought is that most every circumstance and even every object that we can experience on the earth is somehow inspired by a underlying archetypal truth or an archetypal pattern. When something deviates and deviates grossly from the archetypal root, there's a sense of tension and a lack of beauty. So, for instance, if we think of the archetype of the Divine Mother and the Divine Mother and the Divine Child, we often can find archetypal images of a luminous joy and almost holiness in that interaction. And when the behavior deviates dramatically from that archetypal image, there's a certain kind of numinous force that is interrupted. And when it is restored to holding more of those archetypal qualities, a numinous energy begins to emerge. I think this is also true in great works of art. If somebody draws a picture of the tree and it grossly violates what is archetypal about a tree, we have a tendency to respond to it in a disturbed way. But an artist who can reveal something underneath treeness and then feed it back to us in a way that we couldn't imagine, often it creates a tremendous numinous feeling and an aesthetic around the truth of it.
I think what you're linking together here, Joseph, is really masterful, which is the relationship, which is often hard to articulate. You know, we say archetypal this or that, and people go, oh, okay. But the archetypal root of mother or tree and beauty and truth, they are all connected and we are wired for it. We light up when we see it. We recognize it. It's numinous. And I think that's incredibly reassuring. It's so experiential.
I find it really comforting to think about it that way, or at least it makes it sensible or reasonable in some part of my mind. And it also makes way for many dimensions of beauty and truth that are not all comforting. Because if we presuppose that the archetype is the truest taproot, and the archetypal image would be something that allows the fullness of the archetype to have some sensible form, and that any actual object or situation that reflects more and more of the archetypal image would in fact cause this numinous quality. But as we remember, the archetypes can be life-giving, they can be horrifying, they have all of these dimensionalities, and Jung didn't have an universally optimistic feeling about archetypes.
That slides into something that I was going to bring up about truth, which can be its association with inflation. When we feel that we have the truth. And Joseph, right there, what you were saying about the power of the archetype, there's a great quote from Marie-Louise von Franz. She says, if an archetype moves the masses, it generally leads to their thinking that they have the truth. This can lead them to despise and perhaps persecute people who think or feel differently. So we can be kind of puffed up with an archetypal inflation and believe that we have the truth. And Jung also spoke to this. There's this wonderful quote that he has about truth. He says, if you discover what you call a truth, you should test it, try it, and eat it. If it feeds you, it is good. But if you cannot live by it and only assume it ought to feed other people, then it is bad. So it's this notion that we have to come to terms with our own truth and resist the temptation to impose that truth on other people, which I think von Franz and Jung are talking very much about the same thing here.
That's such a good point that takes me back to multiple realities. I have a truth that is my truth that I deeply feel and believe. Does that mean it's universal for the two of you, not to mention the public? And that makes me think about a book that's been out for a while called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, spelled Haidt, and it'll be in the show notes, where we do get inflated and we do get convinced, and then the truth becomes rigid and dogmatic because it's the truth, which disallows my subjectivity in the matter, as if what I feel and believe must be objectively true, like 2 and 2 adding up to 4.
Yeah, there's a difference between truth and immediate factual reality. There's room in the notion of truth for subjectivity.
What I was thinking as you were just talking, Deb and Lisa, is the idea that there are infinite truths because there are infinite archetypal structures, and that perhaps even the truth chooses us. So the truths that choose us are like jealous gods that will not permit us to consider other truths.
Isn't that interesting that can happen, that a truth can become like a jealous god, and that something stops? I'm going back to the analogy of the blind man and the elephant, and that each truth was true, but they didn't keep on going. You know, the person who noticed the trunk stopped right there as if that was the answer. And makes me wonder, how does that happen? That we must seize on something, and what's the truth about the truth? Mm-hmm. That once I have it, that's it, the end. And I'm thinking that must be undergirded by anxiety.
Yeah, I think so. I think it touches into other things we've talked about on the podcast, like the need for certainty or the difficulty of sitting with doubt. That somehow, if you're really looking for truth, you also have to make friends with uncertainty and doubt, because there always has to be room for more truth to be revealed, as you were saying, Joseph.
So that, I think, goes to the ego's orientation and adaptation to reality and the multiple facts, both psychologically and materially. But I'm also wondering about the impact of the idea that Jung felt each of us, at least for the first half of life, seems to be aligned with an archetypal dynamic that might shift maybe once over the course of the life. So, for instance, I think of some of the young men I work with who are in the military. Many of them seem to be chosen by the archetype of the warrior. And then, as the archetype of the warrior provides meaning and frames of meanings and orientations between inner and outer ideas, it becomes like a jealous God declaring a kind of truth from that archetypal perspective. And then somebody else may come in and, the archetype of the farmer, let's say, inhabits them really fully. And they're looking out at the same world. They're also telling truths that are framed by an archetypal orientation, which again chose them. They did not choose it. And on along the innumerable variations. So that as the archetypes inform us, even if it's not pathologic, like a single archetype claiming an entire culture, but an archetype can claim the inner landscape, can claim the inner culture of a person and create a frame that is truthful within the world of that kind of inner God. Of course, that can become very one-sided, which I think is what you were saying, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do a little pivot here and talk about the opposite of truth, which would be lying, and to note that there are times when it's adaptive and necessary. And we've talked about that, of course, in our podcast on the trickster, that sometimes we need to make use of trickster energy and be a little bit dissembling and thinking that the ability to not be truthful is archetypal and innate. And chimpanzees who are able to be dissembling in their behavior were more socially acceptable, according to primatologists. And we know that crows will feign caching food to try to trick other crows rather than having their food stolen. So it kind of goes along with higher orders of intelligence to be able to purposefully not be truthful, and that there's utility in it and an archetypal dimension to it as well.
It seems to me that the crux of that is the degree of consciousness one brings to making the choice to dissemble or to activate your inner trickster. Am I really doing this consciously and from a grounded taproot and place in me? Or do I really not know where I'm coming from? Is it just a defense? Am I unaware of my own anxiety in a certain situation? Am I fooling myself as well as trying to fool the other person? That whole idea, what's going on in me, more than often what it is I do. Why am I doing it?
So linking our behavior to a kind of authentic place in the psyche is a way of finding a truth, even if it's a really uncomfortable truth. I'm also thinking about the difference between lying versus containment. So there can be, and it's painful to watch, many people in service to being truthful are overly disclosing. Whatever they're thinking or whatever they think they're thinking or feeling kind of tumbles out of their mouths with which I often associate with a child complex. You would expect that from a 4 or 5-year-old, that, whatever is going on, if they have language for it, they're going to talk about it. We often think that's really funny because the things that they'll say, which are true, and we're not accustomed to people just saying them right out loud. But there comes in maturity, and certainly in our work as analysts, a perception of what's true, and then a decision to either withhold or contain. And it makes me wonder about, when is the containment in service to the truth, and when is the containment or the withholding in service to something destructive, in service to the lie.
Mm-hmm.
So we're called to grapple with ourselves around this again and again and again, maybe even in the course of a day. Of, where you pass somebody at work, back when we used to go to work, and they say, "How are you?" And automatic response is, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. How are you?" Well, what was that about for me? And I don't think we can take the time to reflect on every single iteration or response that we provide during the course of a day, but it's worth reflecting as much as we can bear to, of how am I doing? What am I doing? Why am I doing it?
Reminds me of that Jack Nicholson moment. You can't handle the truth.
And maybe this is a good place to switch to a dream.
Hi, this is Lisa from This Jungian Life podcast. Joseph, Deb, and I have been deeply moved by your responses to our work. Producing, editing, and distributing the podcast involves substantial expenses, and we need your help. Please stop by our website, thisjungianlife.com, and click on the heading Be Our Patron. You'll be redirected to our Patreon funding page. Patreon helps creators connect with people who believe in projects like ours. There, you can sign up with your credit card to support us for as little as $1 a month, and at higher levels of support, we'll provide special episodes, behind-the-scenes photos and stories, and a chance to join a select pool of listeners for dream interpretations. Thank you.
So our dreamer is a 44-year-old male working as a grocery store clerk, and here is the dream. He entitles it, The Strange Visitor. I was in my house, the one my family and I have lived in for the past 16 years. It's a small ranch, but in my dream there was no furniture and all the walls were painted deep glossy red, almost like blood. But the walls were not in good shape. They were scraped and nicked. On one wall, the drywall was missing completely and the studs were exposed. I was with my 2 boys, but my wife was not there. Suddenly, a man walked in the house whom I'd never seen before, but somehow I knew exactly who he was. So I asked my 2 boys, who are teenagers, "Do you know who this is?" They did not know. So I told them, "It's Mr. Harkness. He used to live here before we did." And parenthetically he adds, "In real life, Mr. Harkness died a few decades ago when we bought the home from his 2 sons. When we bought the home, Mr. Harkness's widow had just died because of a fire in the home. I don't think she died in it, but in the hospital afterward. Again, I'd never met Mr. Harkness and I've never thought about him. He appeared in my dream as an old man with silver frame glasses and a tan Carhartt jacket. For some reason I asked him, what was it like to live here in 1955? That's when the home was built. To which he replied in a very ominous tone, I don't know. I wasn't the first one to live here. There was another before me. I was very surprised and didn't believe him because I thought I knew he was the one who built the home. So the 4 of us began to inspect the home and saw it was in rough shape. But it's strange, because though it looked rough, It was still very bright and sunny inside and felt hopeful. When we saw the wall with missing drywall and exposed studs, I said right away to my two sons, "Well, boys, let's go to the hardware store and get some supplies to fix this wall today." I assumed Mr. Harkness would be impressed with my work ethic and drive to get the house repaired so quickly, but he simply moved slowly to the corner of the home where the broken wall met another wall and leaned over, pointed to the floor, and said, "Do you see that? Plumbing tape. You need to fix that plumbing there first, son. Take your time. It doesn't need to be fixed today. You don't want to miss anything as important as this." I breathed a sigh of relief. He provides a bit of context. I'm trying to get my life back together after a serious moral failure 6 years ago. I'm working really hard at becoming better, but the more I learn about myself, it seems the farther I need to go. My marriage of 22 years is strained, but we are hanging in there. The main feelings in the dream were being scared about the condition of the home, glad my boys were with me, excited that Mr. Harkness could visit us. I felt hopeful and relieved. He explains a bit more. Again, I've never thought about the man in my dream, even though he left behind a few tools I found in the home, and I still use them today. Also, I'm a very religious person, but I'm rethinking my understanding of my Christian faith. Well, it's interesting. There seem to be all men in the dream.
Yeah, that's what struck me too.
Well, and it's two groups of father and two sons.
Mm-hmm.
And the wife is missing in both cases. So it's a little bit like if this were a fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
The king and his two sons, and where's the missing feminine principle or the fourth?
I wonder if the feminine figure is the house itself. Hestia, the home, the containing force. That somehow in the psyche
It might be
requires
implied
attention.
there. Yeah. But it seems notable that the feminine is missing, and so I would wonder there about the relationship with the feeling function.
Mm.
And it's hinted at a little bit that there is no furniture, but all the walls were painted deep, glossy red, almost like blood. And the walls were not in good shape. So something maybe about boundaries. And I think about this, what would it feel like to be in a house where the walls had this red color that sort of promises life, the life force? On the other hand, wouldn't it feel strange? Wouldn't that evoke a particular feeling in the dreamer? So I'm just thinking of this situation as it is, and your idea, Joseph, about the house too, as a containing womb-like, perhaps feminine symbol.
That in his psyche really needs a lot of work and a lot of attention.
Yes, really needs repair.
I'm wondering about, this is really, I'm going on an intuitive jag here, but I'm wondering about the parental complexes. I'm wondering about the lack of women, and maybe just being curious about what the relationship with mom may have been like. And also, of course, the central image of the dream is Mr. Harkness. Now, Mr. Harkness seems to harken back to an earlier configuration of father and two sons. And so does it point to something ancestral? Does it point perhaps to his relationship with his father or with other men who may have come before him? Because not only is Mr. Harkness there, a kind of earlier version of whoever inhabited that home, but he says, and there was one before me. I'm not even the earliest here. So it's sort of the men who came before, the men who had inhabited this space before.
The ancestors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there is something here around the feminine and the past. Mr. Harkness's widow had just died because of a fire in the home. And our dreamer says that he's hanging in there with his marriage after a moral failing. I'm wondering about where that history might be with ancestors, the feminine, and fire and feeling, of course, are very closely aligned in the psyche. That's where the heat is. Emotional heat imaged as fire often.
Yeah, that's a really interesting parallel, Deb. That his marriage is hanging in there while Mrs. Harkness apparently didn't manage to hang in there after her wounding, whatever that was.
So it makes me think about trauma. I mean, a fire in the home would be trauma. And sometimes the trauma that we experience as adults is an echo of a trauma that happened before.
So maybe the strain in the marriage was a kind of setting the marriage on fire, but maybe that was also demonstrated by the father before. I think if men are raised in a home, for instance, and I'm not saying this explicitly about the dreamer, but raised in a home where infidelity is common, maybe raised in a home where the father, is almost quietly expected to take a mistress or more, and it's never spoken of, but then it becomes a context that falls into the sons, who maybe now live in a much more modern, different kind of environment where that's not really tolerated, and yet the pattern still wants to be reproduced.
Well, and in that sense, Mr. Harkness seems like an image of a positive progenitor. I mean, he's left the tools there that the dreamer still uses, and the dream Mr. Harkness seems to have this wisdom that the first thing to fix is not the drywall, which is merely, in a sense, cosmetic, but to fix the plumbing that's behind the walls. So plumbing, of course, is that through which feeling or water flows. And Mr. Harkness says, this is going to take time. It's going to take time for feeling to begin to flow freely.
And he also has such a lovely kind of paternal tone, our dream image of Mr. Harkness. As he says, son, take your time. It doesn't need to be fixed today, but don't miss it because it's important. It's a very kindly, fatherly calling up of that positive father archetype.
And one of the message that we might take away from that is, he's a man who has lost his wife and remains related, competent, and able to repair. And for a number of men, if the marriage isn't going to survive on one level or another, to feel that there is still a spirit of the father that's saying, we'll get through this, that the whole world doesn't need to fall apart. But don't focus on repairing the cosmetics. Don't worry about the drywall right now, because that makes it look nice, and I get it. But we have to look at the bones. And as you said, the pipes that carry feeling and the water of life. But let's make sure that the real foundational stuff is all working, and then we can make it look nice.
It's also the feeling tone of, and take your time. That it's a day by day. You're going to live into it. You do a little today and a little tomorrow, living into it in a doable way. I think that tone is really bears a relationship to what the dreamer said, that that he's hanging in there with his wife and their marriage. That's right, day by day, little by little.
The dreamer entitled this dream "The Strange Visitor," and this was indeed a kind of visitation by a wisdom figure in the psyche. You have been companioned.
I think that's exactly right. And maybe that ties in with what he says about his Christian faith and being religious, but rethinking his understanding of here is something that has come to companion him on that part of his journey as well.
When you talk about that connection, It reminds me of the idea of redemption.
Mm.
And that part of the decrepit house, which still is sunny and has all kinds of potential, that the house itself is in need of redemption.
Yeah. The container for him and his wife and his 2 sons. And I like that you went back to his description of it being sunny inside and bright. And it felt hopeful, he says in the dream. And there it is. Yes, it is.
That there is hope.
Mm-hmm. And the redemption is possible day by day. Take your time. Doesn't need to be fixed today. But don't miss anything important like this. I can't imagine a better visitation from a stranger.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Mr. Harkness is hearkening him.
And there's so much energy. You know, the dream ego, the 2 sons, I mean, they're just kind of brimming. Let's go to the store. Let's get it done. Here's the work.
Uh-huh.
So this fellow has a lot of access to energy and determination.
Mm-hmm. And he has help.
And he has help. He's not alone, as you said.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.